Good morning, Senator. Sorry we're a bit late. We just had some difficulties with StreamYard. Today we wanted to talk about some story that I guess had kind of gone viral about a woman in particular in the DEI sector that was caught stealing property in New York after one of the Knicks games. And I think we have about 3 other topics. So it's kind of going to be a fast-paced show today. So I want to go ahead and pass it to you, Senator. How are you doing this morning? And good morning.
Thank you, Morgan. Yeah, I'm doing just great, and glad that you could be hosting us today. Yeah, this is an interesting case. This thing really went wild on video. There is an executive for J.P. Morgan Chase up in New York, and her name is Angie Baez. And there was a viral video that showed her in front of a number of different people on a main street in New York City, and she's stealing one of these Knicks trash containers, and you can see, look at that mass of garbage that she is throwing out there right in front of everything, right on a main street in New York City, oblivious to her crime of theft, and it's just like, hey, I'm the queen, or whatever pronoun she uses, and I don't have to care about anything. I could be as obnoxious as I want because I got the power. So here she is dumping these piles of trash. Now, J.P. Morgan has been one of the leaders in DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, which was meant to sound nice, but really it's sort of a code name for absolute racism. And so here she has served as an executive there for J.P. Morgan, and she's held, I think, a couple of jobs. But the media focused on her background as the former executive director of diversity, equity, and inclusion for some organization called the Infatuation, which was acquired by J.P. Morgan Chase. And so when this all hit, the Department of Sanitation fined her $175. But predictably, the New York City police said, we're not going to prosecute because there's been no formal complaint lodged. Now, it doesn't matter that you have like millions of people who have seen her doing this, carrying this thing out. Now, there's something in law enforcement. When you have someone who gets a lot of publicity in conjunction with a crime, you tend to go out of your way to prosecute that person because it makes the point for all of the other people out there who are committing similar crimes. So in New York, just trashing the place and just absolutely just disrespecting everybody in the whole neighborhood. That's not a real big deal, but good law enforcement would say, okay, we're going after that woman. Maybe we get her, maybe it's not the biggest sentence in the world, but we convict her. And that way it makes everybody else, the millions of people, say, okay, well, you better not dump trash on the sidewalk in New York City. But of course, in New York, you've got a pro-crime administration now. They favor criminals over non-criminals. And so, no, they're not going to look. They're going to look the other way. So anyway, this Angie Baez has an extensive career history in corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And experts estimate that she's making somewhere between $250,000 and $350,000 a year. So this is a rich lady. I don't know whether you're making $250,000. I'm not making $250,000.
Oh yeah.
And this Angie Baez is the co-founder of a company named Same Page Company. And it is self-described as a queer and BIPOC-owned agency. And they manage talent like her, to increase representation, equity, and diversity. And she personally identifies as BIPOC, which, for those who can't keep up with the latest leftist slang, that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Basically, they should just say non-white. This is just, everybody, we're against everybody. It's sort of everybody against white, basically, is the movement. And now it doesn't explicitly say whether it says that it's co-founded by people who are queer, and nobody else is supposed to use that term, but they could use it. It doesn't say whether she considers herself queer or whether it's other co-founder or co-founders. But in any event, that's how radical, they express themselves. And anyway, she devotes herself to corporate diversity metrics, which means quotas. And so she did this for Saks Fifth Avenue and some other prominent places. And I guess it's just, it just shows the arrogance of some of the folks on the left who, they make a living through generating hatred against other people. And so she's sort of a prime example of our times of what goes on in this whole DEI movement today.
Mm-hmm. We had a conversation on DEI. My goodness, probably over half a year ago. We've been doing this for a little bit now. It might have been actually a year ago. And your arguments were very sound. The Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1964 to protect the individual from being discriminated against. And now we kind of have this progression of culture where we're uplifting groups as opposed to looking at the individual and to see if they are being discriminated against in certain respects, to whether they meet the criteria to conduct the job in the manner that needs to be conducted, or they're getting hired to basically appear more diverse or something, whereas opposed to we're not hiring on the accountability of merit anymore. We're hiring on the accountability of trying to appear, I guess how this culture describes it, diverse, progressive, and in respects like that. And I think that your argument that you had made in that particular podcast was very interesting and enlightening to me, because you kind of spoke about how the existing laws already are enacted to protect the individual itself from not being discriminated against, and highlighting their merit and their character over something superficial like their gender or their race or something like that really doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of whether they can conduct the job properly.
Yeah, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution was one of 3 constitutional amendments enacted after the Civil War. And the thrust of all 3 of them was, we have to take the status of slaves, and we have to convert, we convert them from slaves and people's property to citizens, to full-fledged humanity, which certainly they were full-fledged humanity as slaves, but we are going to now legally, we're going to convert and we're going to put them on a level playing field with everyone else. And so even with the tremendous pressure at the very end of the Civil War to get freedom and equality for Black Americans, there was at least some balance. And when they drafted the 14th Amendment, and keep in mind that it was pushed through at a point where the former Confederate states really did not have a voice in this thing to a genuine extent. And so, but anyway, still there was this feeling among even kind of an extreme block of people in Congress at that point that if we're going to say that the slaves will be equal, we need to say everyone will be equal. And so it didn't say that, we're freeing the slaves and the slaves will be treated equally. What it says is everyone will be treated equally. And then it laid out certain categories and, race, color, religion, national origin, sex is in there somewhere. Anyway, the idea, everybody has a race, color, gender, all of these things. You have former, people who were slaves and were freed, they had. And so the idea was we're going to make everybody just equal before the law. And then the way that it developed, just from the outset, unfortunately, very sadly for America, there became this, it wasn't a cottage industry, it was a massive industry of lawsuits where it was just kind of understood that under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is what really broke the dam, that we really don't care about whites or Hispanics or about Asians. This is about Blacks, and we don't care about men. We care about women. This is all about women, and sort of this cherry picking. And that's where we went off on this dramatically terrible, self-destructive direction that, and I experienced it very early after the Civil Rights Act had been enacted. And, when I went and appeared before a federal district judge in Pensacola, Florida, Winston E. Arno was his name. And this was on a sex discrimination case. And I was representing a woman named Joan Holland and against the Air Force. And anyway, when the judge came in, we had a battery of lawyers on one side and me, a kid on the other side. And the judge leaned back and he kind of mused to himself, he said, I suppose it would theoretically be possible that a male could file for discrimination, sex discrimination. And then I said, Your Honor, I said, he mentioned John Holland. Well, it wasn't John Holland, it was Joan Holland. And I said, Your Honor, I said, this is not John Holland, this is Joan Holland, a woman. And if you could see him, he was sitting at the end of this long table and just sort of leaned back like this. And all of a sudden, when I said this is a woman, he sits up, he reaches over, he grabs his pen, he takes the complaint, he begins going through it, and he takes it dead seriously. and he's ruling against the Air Force on everything. Anyway, and so when I left, that moment in time has stuck with me because it really showed the essence of where we were headed. He was just obviously contemptuous of the notion that a man could file, even though that's what the words of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 said, didn't matter. And so it's thrown us off. But in any event, so today, the liberals simply do not hold themselves accountable. They can upend garbage in daylight. They can espouse environmentalism while they trash the city. They can complain about white privilege while they're there and they're pulling in massive paychecks for spreading racial division. And I suppose there are a whole lot of white people who would say, you know what, I'd love to have the same privilege this lady had where I could be, raking in that kind of money. So it's a sad thing. I hope we can at some point get ourselves in the direction that I wanted to go when I was a high school kid, riding with blacks, sitting in the colored only section of the bus because I felt it was so unfair, and I stood with them in favor of ending segregation and that type of discrimination. I still, my position has never changed since then. It was radical at that time to stand beside the blacks as they were trying to come out of that situation. But we need to get the movement out of the corrupt state that it's in now and back to where that people just try to be Americans and everybody, be based on merit and not on some sort of racial thumb on the scales.
Yeah. Now I know we have 3 other topics to get to, so I want to go ahead and usher those into the conversation so we have enough time to speak about this one. This article that you sent me, we might have very interesting discussion on this because I, for one, found it to be very alarming of how the prosecution ensued. We can go further into that about there was this what they claim to be Antifa cell got into an altercation at an ICE facility in July 4th of 2025. I have the camera footage of this where I believe they were setting fireworks off and into the facility. From my knowledge, it was a phone call by the desk worker in the ICE facility calling the cops saying that she wasn't sure what was happening, but there is a lot of loud noises, and she thought that there were individuals trying to get into the facility. My quarrel is with the adoption of the domestic terrorist and how it is used in prosecutions. So I want to go ahead and pass it to you, and we can kind of bounce back of why I'm kind of weary and of this new question of domestic terrorist prosecution.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from, what your concern is, not where you're coming from, but just your concern. It can be sometimes, politically tempting to use these vague terms like domestic terrorism. I would say that this was a very violent, coordinated attack. This was on the Prairie Land U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas. They staged this on July the 4th 2025. And the group that was carrying it out, they wore the standardized black bloc tactical gear with face coverings to mask their identities, and engaged in systematic property damage, slashed tires on government vehicles, used encrypted communications, and then they used the commercial grade fireworks, which they fired at the staff of the ICE facility.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I just want to say I do have the security footage and body cam footage, so we can inject that when that's needed.
Yes. Okay. Well, you want to show that right now?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Surveillance cameras at the detention facility, and police body cam video showing demonstrators detained on the ground at one point, getting questioned and then later arrested. But the most intense video is the moment Alvarado Police Lieutenant Thomas Gross was shot. And I want to give you fair warning, the video is intense, but please know that he did survive. He says the bullet went through his shoulder within seconds of arriving at the ICE facility late that 4th of July night.
He's running! Get on the ground! I'm hit!
Then, after the body camera video here from other law enforcement officers, they record a conversation that they have with Gross, where they ask if he's okay after he was hit.
Who shot?
Officer hit.
1820. We have an officer that's been hit. Who's hit?
I am.
You good?
No, I'm hit. My back.
You're in the back? Oh, hey.
He shot me in the neck, in the back.
Yeah, I got him. Okay. Hey, you're good. Where'd they go?
I know they ran off that way. I'm sorry, they ran off that way.
Video also shows officers processing weapons at one point and other evidence from the scene that night. More than a dozen people in all were arrested. Some of them were just sentenced this week to very lengthy prison time, up to 100 years in prison for one of those people convicted.
Yeah, those are good clips. So during the ambush, there was a police officer who was called to the scene. He rushed to the scene, got out. He was shot through the neck. His name is Lieutenant Thomas Gross. He survived the shooting, although the bullet traveled entirely through his body, entering his neck and exiting his back. He managed to return fire at the shooter Benjamin Song before he collapsed and he fell to the ground. He was able to call for emergency backup. And so very violent attack, very nearly deadly, almost killed the officer. But fortunately he did survive, and they were able to control the situation. So I think in this case, I mean, this was, I'm not real crazy about the term terrorism because it's so all-encompassing. But at the same time, you kind of needed something that would encompass what was an attack on the facility, an attempt to overwhelm it, and a willingness to murder in order to carry that out. So this probably is one instance where maybe that terminology is useful.
Well, I get weary of this use of it because I think we had discussed this on the show prior. The National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, which any president can go ahead and enact one, which kind of dictates how the how I want to put it, like how the executive branch is going to conduct itself in different matters. And in this one, it articulates the term domestic terrorist as anyone who perceived to be anti-Christian, anti-American, anti-capitalist. I believe that it also includes anti-fascist, which includes the Antifa group. What I'm wary of is when Barack Obama was president, we know that he got rid of habeas corpus, which allowed when you are deemed a domestic terrorist or a terrorist, you can be detained indefinitely. So that's where I get wary of it, because it seems like it is whoever is in holding of the executive branch determines what it means to be a domestic terrorist.
Yeah.
During Biden, it was, if you were labeled like nationalist, you have this term. I believe prior to that, it was environmentalist terrorism is considered domestic terrorism. We can remember the case that came out of Georgia, where you had a group of people who were protesting a facility where cops would be training called, I think it's called Cop City. It was a very large area that was in a protective forest area where you had environmentalists basically camping out there to not have the forest, I guess, taken down and constructed for this police operation. We had a man did die from an altercation with the cop there. I just get weary of the continued progression of chipping away rights. I think you and I would both agree that I'm super thankful that this cop survived. And what I say is that there were crimes that were already being committed that day. Attempted murder of a cop is a serious crime. Defacing government property is also already a crime. So when you extend these books and you make it to where now these individuals are being labeled domestic terrorists, which the Department of Justice put out, the people that were prosecuted, the combined sentences of 450 years in prison. I believe the people that were there with the intention to cause violence and murder individuals definitely need to have lengthy sentences. But with the attachment of the word terrorist, stripping away of rights, I get wary of that, because I don't know where it ends. Given another president or in a few years, how much, more of chipping away of your civil liberties in, the court of law, because as of, you are innocent until proven guilty. But if you are deemed a terrorist, you can be detained indefinitely, not given reason for your detainment. And so that's where my hesitation comes from. Not so much the fact that these people were prosecuted, but they were prosecuted with the addition of being a domestic terrorist.
Yeah, I say, and you certainly are, not defending anything that this particularly Birdsong, the one who got 100 years, that type of thing. But I understand that when you have the term terrorism, we fought the war on terror, which ended up where we fought every anti-terrorist country in the Middle East by aligning ourselves with the biggest sponsors of terrorism. And so that terror it tends to be used loosely, and I think you make a good point there. I'm glad that they slammed these folks, because there is a history. There's another case back in 2020. Oh wait, let's see. I've got it's 2019. There was an Antifa supporter at an ICE detention facility in Tacoma, Washington, and he was armed with a rifle and attempted to explode a propane tank, but he was killed by the responding police officers before he could do that. So there's sort of this anti-ICE history with the with the Antifa movement. And the Antifa is a very interesting group. It's I think they're very well funded, but it's a very amorphous group that very deliberately avoids identifying itself in ways that can be traced back. But one of their things is they wear what they call black bloc attire, all black clothing, helmets, and masks to conceal the identity. New York Police Department, their intelligence briefing noted that groups wearing garb like this employed bicycle scouts to map out police locations, and they would also distribute tools for smashing windows, and they would direct breakaway groups to torch vehicles using Molotov cocktails. I think that's during the George Floyd racial uprising. So there's a history of this type of thing, big firebombing in Austin, Newark firebombing arrest. So anyone who lived through the George Floyd racial, conflagration recalls back to hundreds of riots, burnings, lootings, assaults, and intimidation of people who were not BIPOC. And typically Antifa, the BLM groups tend to be kind of mixed race. They were predominantly black, but they had a number of whites. The Antifa tended to be white or non-black, let's say non-black. And many of the Antifa people were kids from wealthy families. So they'd come out of their gated communities and they'd go out and they'd burn down the non-gated communities in the name of racial equity. The most dramatic of all of the Antifa attacks was on the night of May 29th, 2020, when in the course of all of the George Floyd riots, there was a concerted movement to attack the White House. And the attack was so threatening that at a certain point, the Secret Service agents, they didn't ask the president what he wanted to do. They just said, Mr. President, we're taking you to the underground bunker because their job is to preserve the executive branch of government. And the president is the face of the entire executive branch. And so they took him down. They didn't care what he wanted or didn't want to do. He was going along with family members. And meanwhile, there was this enormous siege taking place outside the White House. And it was a very coordinated tactical assault by radical extremists associated with BLM and Antifa. And it went on for days where these violent agitators would, during the daytime, they'd get out there, they'd do protests and so forth. But when nightfall came, they would turn the city into a war zone. And again, using this black bloc tactic where they would they'd have their hoodies, body armor, helmets, face masks, and they would gather, and they would use brickbats. They hurling very heavy bricks. They'd have bottles of urine and feces, and then they would use the commercial grade fireworks that they would fire right in the faces of the Secret Service agents and other federal agents who had gathered to defend the executive branch of government. And in any event, at night they They tore down steel security barricades. They torched the Secret Service guard shack. They burned St. John's Church, which stands only 500 feet away from the White House. And before it was over, the rioters had injured 60 federal agents using a textbook planned offensive, and came very close to overthrowing the government of the United States by killing or somehow dethroning the president of the United States, Donald Trump. And so much is made of we had the big riot on the Capitol where a whole lot of people just walked through the Capitol building and so forth. But the media almost never talks about the fact that the United States came within a hair's breadth of these mobs overwhelming the Secret Service agents at the White House and ousting the government of the United States. Much closer. Now, the rioters at the U.S. Capitol, when they acted, they threatened to slow down the wheels of government and delay things and so forth. But there's never any serious possibility that they were going to somehow bring down the government. When the mobs went after the president of the United States, there was sort of the thin blue line that held, fortunately, but you can tell it was 60 agents being injured in the course of it. And the fact that the president had to be almost, well, I don't think he didn't resist, but they didn't say, Mr. President, would you like us to take you down? They just said, Mr. President, we're going down to the secure bunker because we're in danger of our lines collapsing and being overwhelmed. And and hopefully, the government was so corrupted at that point because you had leftists in the Pentagon and leftists in the intelligence agencies, and you would hope that had the lines collapsed and the president been down there, that the military would have launched an attack to restore the president back to office. And but at that time, there's no guarantee they would have, because you had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, and he was asked by the president to walk with him just a short distance across to St. John's Church, and he felt compelled to apologize for walking with the president of the United States, who had just been driven into a secure bunker by a violent mob. And he felt he had to apologize to the mob because he had stood beside the president, who had the temerity to walk across this street and stand there by this church that had been burned to demonstrate, hey, the federal government is still operational. The president is still in charge of the government. And so you had such corruption within that first Trump administration, working very, very much against him. So it was, and Antifa was sort of in the whole thing. I encountered Antifa just in local demonstrations that they were not violent, but had they been able to get enough numbers and power, they would have become violent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I get understand the state that this country is in, where you have records amount of people who are acknowledging a system is not adequately being conducted the way that it was designed to be. You have corruption at the highest levels not being checked, not justice not being enacted towards them. And so you have people on both ideological spectrums who are being exploited and through the media, through echo chambers, through social media, and are encouraged to take these violent actions. And I think that it's more the onus is a lot on the top level of our governments and also the media that kind of emboldens these actions. Maybe we spoke about BLM, how it turns into the riots, and a lot of you turned on the media. They played George Floyd 24/7 to rile up the community to do these things. And you also said that there was peaceful demonstrations in the daytime where you had people who had legitimate grievances that wanted to be addressed. And then you had people who were opportunists and exploitists and went out at night and conducted themselves in heinous actions, defiled their own communities, even small businesses. I think one man, a very powerful film that I had seen was by a man named Matt Orfala, who conducted a documentary on the riots in Kenosha. Kenosha is where you would have why is his name leaving my attention right now? The young man who was prosecuted for the murder of the individuals. There was do you know who I'm talking about? I'm
not sure that I do. I mean, it's such a swirl of things that
it was in the large gosh, I hate that his name is leaving me, but he creates the case where he talked about how this young man had, earlier in the day, he was working, trying to scrub the graffiti off of buildings, and he was asked to protect a car dealership from one of his friends. Rittenhouse, Kyle Rittenhouse. Thank you. Someone in the chat help me.
Yeah.
But it kind of exposed how the media was conducting itself to malign this young man as a white supremacist racist, which it had a trickle-down effect. I mean, this man would go to the colleges and be faced with like the most intense amount of violence, ridicule, to the point where he had to be ushered out of certain areas because of the threat of his safety. And I blame the media for this. Same with the riots that happened on January 6th. There were unruly people that day that did take actions with being violent towards Capitol Police, but were also peaceful people that were trying to express their grievances and what they thought was an illegitimate election.
There may have been there are probably over 500,000 Americans who came from all over, and of course, we could talk endlessly about that event, but the bulk of people there who went into the Capitol were ushered in by the Capitol Police, who just opened the doors and said, "Come on in." Then there was the ones at the front entrance where there was the violence. I'll never understand why there was not a single member of Congress who didn't have the gonads to say, "I'm going to go down, I'm going to talk with these people." I used to do this at very raucous demonstrations in the Richmond Capitol, and I was viewed by many people as the foremost advocate of the pro-life movement. Me and Bob Marshall, a very heroic delegate, but so everybody knew, and I'm pretty easy to identify. And so here is this big mob chanting and all, and they're outside of the Commonwealth Park Suites hotel right at the edge of the Capitol. And I came down and everybody, chanting, really fired up against a particular bill that was controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And I just waded into the crowd, shook hands with people, and said hello, and got a pretty good reaction. As I left, everybody started applauding. I mean, it was just crazy. But you would think that somebody among all these congressmen would just say, I got to walk down the front steps here, and I'm going to walk into that crowd and say, what are you guys doing? Remember, these police officers are doing their job, but there was not a single leader. And who was it? Am I thinking? Well, anyway, the very liberal senator at the time from Utah, I think. Anyway, you had this atmosphere of panic, and senators and congressmen, they had whipped themselves into a mental frenzy, and nobody had the gall to say, hey, let's just go down here and kind of quiet things down, not through force, but just walk out into the mob and say, hey, look, this aspect of it, I understand you want to come into the Capitol and all of these other things, but I think had you had a single member of Congress who just had a little bit of gumption to walk out and do this, you'd be amazed at what some of these protests, particularly where you have people who genuinely have a concern. They're not just pure ideologues, but they're fired up because the nation thought that the election had been fraudulent, it had been stolen. I thought it. I still believe it, and so whether you agree with that, whether you think it's right or wrong, it wasn't that people were coming there because they didn't get the right result. It was because people felt like the right result had not been recorded. But anyway, I don't know. It's a swirl of things. We'll see lots of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the sentiment I was just trying to get, is that you have a lot of legitimate grievances in this nation that are not being dealt with adequately. And so therefore they're being exploited, and you have people who are, I would say, malleable in the extent to where they're being pushed to conduct themselves in manners that is not, how a community member should serve themselves. I think, and that is a testament to what you were saying, how no representative came out and kind of confronted the people, is what I'm basically saying, is that people see that, people understand that our representatives have manipulated their position to not be public servants, but to be the lords of the community, and whatever they say goes, and that they, are the ones that need to be put on the pedestal, as opposed to actually hearing the constituents and what they want and pushing for those ambitions. So that's kind of where I got. And then knowing that reality, I fear that there will be this more progression of violent actions, civil unrest, when our representatives are conducting themselves like lords and ladies and not like representatives.
Well, Morgan, I'd like to touch on one more thing before we finish.
Yes. Sorry, I know we went a little extra on this one and the last story, but
and this is on the fentanyl.
Coming out of Europe. Is that the next story?
Well, let me see. Yes, maybe we'll talk about the drop in the fentanyl drug deaths at another time. Yeah, let's touch on that. Do you have a video to go with it?
Pardon me, I do not. I should have grabbed one, but I didn't. I have the snapshot of the article you sent me and some of the bullet points of what was in the bill.
Yes. Let me just run through this. The European Union, it has a parliament, and Parliament doesn't have the powers that the U.S. Congress does, but in a sense, the Parliament is the legislative body of the European Union. And so there's been so much pressure regarding illegal immigration and even legal migration that finally it's reached a breaking point. And finally, the European Commission, they don't have a president. There's nobody you can elect as your executive, your chief executive. It's kind of a soft dictatorship, the whole EU business is. But in any event, this regulation came down sort of in the nature of a bill that we would have in Congress. And it really cracked down pretty hard on illegal immigration. And now the European Union for decades and decades has been the burying place for any attempt by people from any European nation to get control of it. They've been the ones who have kept the sort of the open borders policy for all of Europe and dictated it to all the different countries. And finally, this thing came to a vote, and this pretty tough piece of legislation to crack down on immigration. And on June the 18th, this month, there was a vote held by the European Parliament on cracking down. And when the bill passed, I mean, this is so dramatic. It's been like 40 or 50 years with the EU being the block that prevents people from having any common sense immigration policies. And when it was passed, overwhelmingly, there was just an uproar in the Parliament with people chanting, "Send them back, send them back." And it was very dramatic and very interesting that it got almost no coverage in the United States. But what's happened, the effort of President Trump to close the borders, get control over the just swarming of the border, the collapse of the border that occurred under Biden, and that gave some support to the movement in Europe, which was independent of the situation in the United States, but it was aided by the dramatic success that President Trump had in restoring order to the border. And so the vote in the European Parliament was 418 yes, 218 no. So it's very, almost a 2/3 vote in favor of cracking down on immigration. And it gave stronger deportation powers, faster powers of returning people to their home countries. It required mutual recognition of decisions made by member states, so that sort of like in the United States, we, like here in Virginia, we would recognize a criminal prosecution by the state of Florida or by the state of New York, and we would honor that. Well, they're saying now that that's going to have to be done in Europe, so that Germany would have to recognize a decision to deport someone that was made in France or in Italy. But it expands the powers to detain the illegal immigrants, and it sets up return hubs, or at least it sets up the mechanism where people can be sent to designated third countries to be held there while they're processed. And interestingly, the Alternative for Deutschland, AfD party, which is the populist party in Germany, unanimously voted in favor of the return regulation. And even the government of very unpopular Chancellor Merz of Germany, there was so much pressure on them that the majority of their alliance had to vote in favor of the regulation. I guess the interesting thing is that the European Union, of course, represents most all of the European countries, and I think this vote signals whatever a person's viewpoint is on immigration, that it signals that the world is turning against the very aggressive migration movement, and the energetic cries of "send them back" just sort of gave voice to the common people of France, Italy, Germany, Austria, all of the other countries. And so I think it is very interesting to see, because it's sort of, we see this happening with the United States. We see it happening now throughout Europe. We see it breaking out in Africa, where in South Africa, there's a very intense anti-immigrant movement. And in Asia, they never have lowered the burden for migration. They've always been fairly tough on immigration, except for Australia, which has kind of gone through a crazy period. But anyway, it suggests a very strong cultural movement that I don't think is going away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that develops. And I know that we went a little bit over time and we didn't get to our final story. We can attack that one next time. Is there any closing remarks that you want to kind of close out some of the others, the stories that we had talked about today? The Angie Baez and her story, what happened in New York, the Antifa ICE prosecutions in Prairie Land, Texas. And then, we just spoke about the new law that is enacted to enforce some of the immigration tactics in the EU. Is there anything else that we want to, kind of touch upon or in our closing remarks?
I think we'll leave anything for later. There is so much unfolding. The national political scene is becoming really fascinating in terms of the politics, what's taking place. So we'll pick up next Saturday and continue to march.
Certainly. Well, I'll encourage everyone to like, share, and subscribe, and tune in next week to focus on the news. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Morgan.